Hi everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm really happy and excited to join you and share a little bit on Mars's journey with digital transformation. So today the topic I'll be sharing is ground up digital transformation and how we use digital transformation to drive change one life at a time. It's a little bit cheesy, but follow with me. I'm sure there'll be something useful to take away from this. So just before we begin, you probably want an introduction to myself. So as Chris has mentioned, my name is Alistair Heath, and I'm a digital adoption lead at Mars. And what this means is that I help others, I help our other associates, our 125,000 associates, I help them take their first step into digital so that they can leap ahead, so that they can supercharge everything that they do in their day-to-day roles. So a couple of facts about me. I've been with Mars for 3.5 years now. I completed the Mars Leadership Program back in September, which is our graduate scheme. And I've been in the digital adoption team for 1.5 years as part of that. Just this week, actually, I'm starting a new role as well in HR analytics, still with Mars. So if anyone out there is working in the HR analytics space, I'd love to connect and draw on your experience. So that's a quick introduction to myself, but I also want to introduce you to Mars because I think there's a lot more under the surface, or a lot more than meets the eye. So you probably know Mars through our brands. You probably recognize some of our famous confectionery brands, so things like the Mars bar, of course, Twix, Galaxy if you're in the UK, M&M's as well, all the way through to Wrigley chewing gum. You probably recognize some of our pet food brands as well, Whiskers, Royal Canin, Pedigree as well, and even a number of veterinary clinics in the US as well. We've also got a load of food brands, so things like Uncle Ben's and Dolmio. So an incredible portfolio of brands and products that you guys probably know quite well. So you've definitely come across Mars at some point. We also, as well as our brands, we're also a very principle-led company, and at the core of our corporate culture is something called the 5 principles, which you'll see on the right there. So there's 5 principles: quality, responsibility, mutuality, efficiency, and freedom. And there's a reason I bring these up. They are so key to our understanding our corporate culture, but they're also particularly one of them, which I'll pull out on the next slide, is a really key concept in understanding how ground up digital transformation is happening within Mars. And you'll see that as we go through. You'll see some of these themes recurring as we go through. Now, as Chris mentions as well, this isn't the first time I've been at the Digital Transformation Conference. I was actually here last year sharing the idea about beliefs, behaviors, and tools, and how actually as experts, as people who operate in the realms of digital transformation, we have a duty not just to plan digital transformation from a tool perspective, but how we think about the behaviors that those tools drive, how we think about the beliefs behind digital transformation, and then we plan our digital transformations across all 3 of those areas: beliefs, behaviors, and tools. And I mentioned something at the end of that session that actually got more interest than the session itself. So I definitely last time spent more time talking about stuff that people didn't want to hear about. And one of the comments I made was that when it comes to behaviors, we can't dictate behaviors for everyone. If we have 125,000 employees, we can't dictate behaviors for everyone. I can't tell people what it's like to do agile project management methodology for sales. I can't tell you what it's like to do marketing in a user-centric way. In short, there's too many roles with 125,000 employees for one digital person to make a sort of a solid understanding of every single role, or have a solid understanding of every single role to be able to dictate what the digital transformation looks like for that role. So from that, we came up with this idea in the session of ground up digital transformation, encouraging individuals to digitally transform themselves. And I think that theme has come out time and time again. Now, sooner or later, someone was going to mention coronavirus in this session, weren't they? Like we're all joining over Zoom. We're all joining remotely. So I wanted to bring up this quote because I think it talks to that piece around the responsibility that we have to transform ourselves. So Grant Reed, our CEO, said, there's no playbook for a global pandemic. There's no playbook for a global pandemic, which I find is a fantastically refreshing quote. It's something that's very different from what you're hearing from government that like to pretend they know everything. It's this idea that we didn't see this coming. You don't plan for this. There's no rigid plan to follow. There's no single way out. Instead, what Grant says in the same piece is we will work through this together with our 5 principles to guide us. I love that because it puts exactly what we were saying at the tail end of the conference last year. It draws it into the perspective of the current pandemic. It says that we all have a responsibility, thinking back to those 5 principles, we all have a responsibility to play when we think about how our roles and how our jobs have to change in the new world that has been thrust upon us in the last 3 months. And I think it's exactly the same for digital transformation in a broader sense as well, not just in a COVID sense. We all have a responsibility to transform our own roles. Every employee at every company has that responsibility. It's part of your job description now, whether it's written in or not. And really, the shift then for us as experts and as people who operate in the space of digital transformation isn't to come up with digital transformations that we inflict on others, but actually helping individual associates and employees drive their own change, drive their own digital transformation. So that's a quick introduction at what we'll be looking at today. So if you're interested in helping other employees, other associates drive their own digital transformation, hopefully this session will be the right place for you. Now, to start doing that, I think it's important that we actually understand what digital transformation is and what change is, because I think that's a really good place to start. So what I've shown here on this slide is something called AdCar. It's owned by a change management company called ProSci that Mars have been working with for a number of years. And actually, at the end of this PowerPoint deck, there's a reference to the external training organization we use to host it, if you'd like to look into this in more detail. But if you haven't heard of AdCar, basically what it outlines is the 5 steps for change. Now, these are usually used in the top-down sense, which is, I've got a change I've got to drive in the organization. Let's plan that change through the lens of these 5 steps. But it can also become a really powerful tool for driving change from the ground up. What if we could, by using this tool, what if we could allow individual employees or even individual customers, if we think of the external world as well, to change themselves by guiding them through this framework? So we're going to have a look at the nature of change through new tools or digital ways of working. And if I think of that traditional top-down kind of change management, we've actually seen that quite a lot. Speaking to friends from other companies over the last couple of weeks with coronavirus. So as people have worked from home, what's tended to happen is a lot of people haven't worked from home before, haven't had the chance to work remotely. And what has happened is this. They've been woken up one Monday morning and been told, don't come in today, you've got to work from home. And within a couple of hours, within a couple of days, they get a load of comms, a load of emails come through saying, guys, we're using Microsoft Teams or we're using Zoom now. And they get that comm saying, this is the tool, this is how you have to work from home. And then they wait a couple of hours, a couple of days, and then comes through a load of generic training videos on Microsoft Teams. So you get this awareness and you get this knowledge. So if I look at that through AdCar, we've driven the awareness of the change, i.e. we've driven the awareness of you've got to use Zoom, now you're working from home. We haven't really focused on the desire. Why should I want to use Zoom? Why should I not just use WhatsApp? Why should I not just call people up on the phone? We've then received the training, which drives the knowledge, and that's good because then you have the knowledge of how the tool works. But then in terms of the AdCar change management process, we've just stopped. There's no focus on how we drive the ability to do my job using Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever your remote conferencing solution is. We've just kind of stopped. There's no guide on how to do a sales role or a marketing role with Microsoft Teams. That doesn't exist because we need those individual associates to figure it out. We need those employees to figure out what it's like to do their role working from home or remotely. And then finally, we need to reinforce the change. We need to embed that change so that it becomes the new norm. It becomes the new way of doing things. And particularly with coronavirus, there's actually a reluctance from a lot of people and even from a lot of companies and managers to reinforce the change because we think, well, we'll be back in the office soon. And I think in truth, the thought here is that actually this doesn't quite work because what we're doing is we're inflicting change from the top down. We're pushing out comms, we're pushing out training videos, and training videos by their nature are a playbook. They are trying to teach you how to do something that we know the best practice of. That's the definition of training. And so what we have is a very patchy change management framework, just comms and just training, with no attempt to talk to desirability and reinforcement. And fundamentally, those three components particularly, but arguably all five as well, need to be driven from the ground up. What if we could drive from the ground up desire, ability, and reinforcement around a change with any new tool or any new digital way of working? So what I'm going to share with you on the next couple of slides is the three questions that we ask within Mars as part of something that we call our Discover framework that allows associates to engage with those questions around desire, ability, and reinforcement and drive the change within themselves upwards instead of us inflicting a change on them. And so we'll start with desire. So when we run these Discover sessions, we ask this question first, and it's a question that's very heavily influenced by design thinking and user centricity in that way of working, which is quite simply this: what challenges, problems, and opportunities are you facing in your day-to-day role? And it could be anything. It could be a big business challenge or a big business problem. It could be an opportunity for the organization to expand and do something differently, to push its remit, to create new products or new offerings for consumers. And we ask that question, and we try and change. What we're trying to do is we're trying to link the change into that. We're trying to understand how the change or the digital transformation allows them to achieve that faster and better. Now, some people get really stuck on this problem, on this question, and they say, well, what kind of challenge or problem or opportunity are you looking for? And the response to that I always give them is, well, what keeps you up at night? What's the thing that keeps you up at night? For some people, particularly directors and senior managers, actually a lot of business challenges and problems do keep them up at night. Those are the things that they worry about because that's maybe the thing they're being measured on from a performance perspective. For others, and you see this at all kinds of levels, actually some of the biggest problems that affect our associates are things like, particularly at the moment, things like childcare arrangements, right? The demand that's being put on their time to look after children whilst also doing a full-time job. And actually, a lot of the tools within the digital transformation can help with that. Artificial intelligence could perhaps help us speed up certain processes so they can balance work more effectively. Collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams allow us to collaborate not at the same time in a meeting, but we can edit documents at different times of the day whenever suits us. And so actually what we're doing here when we talk about challenges, problems, and opportunities is we're trying to work out what this tool can help us solve so that it drives desire. Someone can link it to a problem they are actually having rather than seeing a tool or a digital way of working as this abstract concept that is here to disrupt their lives. It's actually here to make their lives better. So we capture the desire and we link it to a desire that you could only source from the ground up by asking people this question. And then we move on to that second piece around ability, which is what experiment could we try with this new tool or with this new digital way of working to solve your problem? I outlined one for you just then about using Microsoft Teams as a collaboration tool to save time or to make collaborating together something that could be fitted in around loads of different people's schedules. And that's exactly what an experiment is. This experiment is something where we're going to try and use this tool to do something a little bit different, and we're very intentional about the language here. The word experiment is very deliberately used so that people know it's okay to fail. It's okay for this experiment to go wrong. And then that is reinforced again typical bad choice of word, but we use that in the reinforcement stage to say, well, actually, how did that experiment go? 1 month later, actually, was using Microsoft Teams a good way to collaborate? Did it help you get all your work done to a higher standard and a better quality, whilst also freeing up time for you to do some of the childcare? Or did it free up time for you to spend with customers? Or did it change whatever other, did it help you progress against whatever you said as your problem, your challenge, or your opportunity? And what should we try next? You've still got probably a list of problems, challenges, opportunities. Are there any more experiments you'd like to try with this digital tool or digital way of working that could help you progress? So what then happens when we look back at this AdCar framework, this framework for change from ProSci, is that as well as having the comms and the training from the ground up, i.e. being pushed from a corporate center, what then starts to happen is that we get a conversation going with associates where they talk about these other areas, where they provide the desire, the ability, and the reinforcement. So if you provide the comms with a space, the comms and the training from the top-down perspective with, from a bottom-up or a ground-up perspective, the space to have the conversation around what this change means to you, you can address the whole of the AdCar framework. You can address the whole of that change piece. Someone receives a comm about a digital change or a new tool, a digital way of working, and they're instantly encouraged as a group with their line manager, individually, it depends on how you choose to do it. They're then encouraged to think about what that change actually means for them as a person, why it should resonate with their sense of purpose. We then have the ability to think about the training, the learning, driving the knowledge, that piece then fitting in there quite nicely, before then taking on the ability piece, that experiment that says, well, how do I apply that knowledge against my original problem? How do I use it to drive progress and to drive growth for our organization? And then finally, I come back and I review it, and hopefully, if that experiment has gone well, that reinforces the change. But even if it doesn't go well, it reinforces the idea that we should keep experimenting, that we should keep trying something different. So before we finish, I'm just going to show you what this looks like in practice. Here's an A4 sheet you could print off, and you could actually use our fake little post-its there to mock up challenges and opportunities before coming up with a problem statement. You could then use that to create an experiment on what could we try? What are the digital tool or way of working experiments that we could try before capturing the findings? And in action, that looks a little bit like this. We ran this with a sales team in the Nordics, and we were looking at driving the adoption of Microsoft Teams. And they came up with loads of challenges, opportunities between them. And we asked them to come up with a problem statement. And they said, it's more difficult to get feedback from our customers as a sales team when we're working remotely. We're used to having sales meetings face-to-face with our customers. We can read their facial expressions to work out when a deal is appealing, when it's maybe needs a little bit more work. But it's very difficult to get that over Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype. How do we do that? And so we came up with an experiment. We said, rather than just logging onto the meeting and using Microsoft Teams as a glorified FaceTime, what we do is we'd log onto that meeting before it starts, and we'd add a couple of polls in the chat so that people could vote as we went through the session, or people could leave feedback as we went through the session. And so that's an experiment that encourages them to use Microsoft Teams in a different way, in a more elaborate way. And we'll then, in 4 weeks' time, do a feedback session on that. And of course, you can use this framework to drive the adoption of other digital tools, other digital ways of working, all through that AdCar piece. So just as we come to an end and as we wrap up for the Q&A around how to do this ground-up digital transformation, first of all, I'd like to encourage you to do this. Whenever you plan a digital transformation or an element around digital transformation, think about the change. The AdCar framework is a great way to do that. So have a look at some of those previous slides and maybe structure some of your activities through the AdCar framework. There's a link on the reference slide at the end of this deck for more information on that. Again, that's a great service offered by ProSci. You can also try to run a discover session. You could do this in a group, filling in that A4 page, doing a collaborative session, thinking about challenges and opportunities, and how from a ground up level, we're going to use digital tools and ways of working to solve those. Of course, those kinds of virtual sessions always work well with snacks. So pick up some of your favorite Mars treats for those workshops. And then, of course, feel free to follow Mars and myself on LinkedIn as well. I'd love to continue the conversation with you there. But for now, I think we're going to go over to some questions. I think we're going to go over for some questions. Thanks, Chris.